Welcome to Oddly Cinematic, where the craft of film is appreciated and celebrated, even if you're using the craft to film smut.
That's right.
Right? No judgment here. Get your coverage. I'm Jordan Delacruz here with amateur fluffer Dan Lawler.
Yeah, I'm all about fluffing. They call me the fluffer nutter for a reason.
We're going to be going deep on the new film X from director Ti West and A24, starring Mia Goth, Brittany Snow, Scott Muscuddy, Jenna Ortega, Martin Henderson, and Owen Campbell, among others. This horror slasher tells the story of a group of amateur filmmakers who take up residence on a farm in rural Texas with the intention of filming a porno. However, they struggle to keep their operation discreet under the watchful eye of their elderly hosts. Big warning, this review contains spoilers. I would say that just off the top, like both of us can recommend this movie, right?
Yeah, I would recommend it for sure.
I mean, use your own discretion with the subject matter. Obviously, it's a slasher horror film with porn as like a big subject.
Yeah.
But
so if you're not into like the grotesque on both ends of the spectrum there, then maybe not for you.
Yeah, but if that's something you can stomach, we recommend it. Go see it and come back and see us afterwards. From this point on, all spoilers are on the table. Okay, let's go. Real quick, I just wanted to do like kind of an update on Ti West. How many films of his have you seen?
I believe I've seen three of his, including X.
So did you? Oh yeah, so this would be the third one.
Yeah, I think so. I've seen I know I've seen like his segment on like VHS or VHS2. I don't remember. This is like over a decade ago, but I've definitely seen Innkeepers and House of the Devil, which I very much love.
Okay, so I've seen this. X would be my third. I saw House of the Devil and The Sacrament.
Oh, and I've seen The Sacrament.
Oh, you've seen The Sacrament,
yes.
so you've gotten four. Okay, so you've basically seen all of his horror fare. I mean, I think he had a couple like smaller films before House of the Devil, but that was like his kind of a rival. And then I know that he famously like directed Cabin Fever too.
Oh yeah.
And he had this like whole concept, you know, with it, and like he wanted to do something interesting with it, but then it got like hacked to death by the producers, and he actually tried to take his name off the film and his contract wouldn't let him. So they had to keep his name on, but he like essentially just disowns his involvement with Cabin Fever 2.
A lot of directors get their start that way. I mean, Jim Cameron got the Piranha 2 start, and wanted his name off of that as well. So
Ti West might be the next Jim Cameron.
That's right.
So yeah, I've only seen House of the Devil and Sacrament prior to this. He's kind of like the horror cousin of like the mumblecore filmmakers. He like collaborates a lot with Joe Swanberg. I also noticed that Joe Swanberg was in the thanks notes. Of this, so I was like, good to know that they're still friends. And then he, after The Sacrament, a couple of years later, he ended up doing a Western that I still haven't seen.
I have not seen it either.
But I looked into it, and apparently it's pretty good. I think it's called In the Valley of Violence.
Yeah. Big Ethan Hawke guy. So
yeah, and John Travolta is in it too, which is like so interesting.
John Travolta was even in it.
Yeah. So and then after that, he did a bunch of TV for a few years, and this is kind of like his return to form. And gotta say, I had a lot of fun.
I did as well.
The screening, we went and saw this on a Monday night, and I was kind of impressed at the turnout.
I was, there was a handful of people there, probably like 20 people, including
there was
us.
At least a few people scattered in each row.
Yeah.
Yeah. For a Monday night though, at like our screening started at like 8:00. It was pretty cool. So it's good to see that people are showing up for this movie. And I have to say, like throughout the movie, people seemed into it.
Yeah.
It wasn't, obviously it's not your Avengers Endgame and hollering thing, but like people were reacting.
Yeah. And I think that it played how it was supposed to for their, the very grotesque sex scene had a lot of like awkward giggles and the, like the really, really tough to watch kills were appropriately shuddered. Yeah. You definitely just heard the gasps and the cries of anguish throughout the theater. It was very fun. So initial reactions in theater. I always go into horror movies excited, even if like it's something like a Paranormal Activity sequel or whatever. If I know it's going to be kind of dumb, not necessarily the height of cinema, I still kind of get excited because it's like, there's just kind of an air in the theater when it comes to horror. Oh, 100%. I think there's a mixture of like, specifically with this movie, I think like I said, it played really well. And this is the first horror movie, like straight on horror movie I've seen in theaters in years now because of the pandemic. I saw Last Night in Soho last year, but like it's not so
elevated.
much. But yeah, there's something about like just the way that being in the dark room, big sound, big image, and like maybe the fact that like there's this weird vulnerability of being scared with other people. Just like ups the tension a level or two. But yeah, it really works for me.
From the opening scene, I think like exactly what this movie's trying to be. In the first 10 minutes, you have basically a crime scene teaser, which is the first nod in many to Texas Chainsaw Massacre that just starts with like, we're going to tease you with the aftermath.
Right.
And then you got cocaine boobs and like a American flag patterned title card telling us that it's 1979.
Right.
And so you're just like, okay, this is going to be grindhouse. It's going to be dirty and pretty shameless about, what it wants to do. But Ti West coming from like the DIY kind of lo-fi side of independent film and always being one to just embrace low budgets. I was like, dang, he's a straight up like filmmaker. Like,
right.
I mean, that's dumb to say. He's made a ton of films, but like this felt like leveled up. Like he grew a lot since we last saw him do horror.
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, a lot of the editing was very impressive to me. Some of the stuff they were juggling by like, not to get too into specifics, but like the stories of both the porno and the movie are like kind of working off of each other. And that's like a really difficult kind of tightrope to walk, I think. So yeah, I totally agree with you. I thought some of the shot composition was like really beautiful too, even if it's very ugly at the same time.
Oh yeah.
Talking like the overhead ponds shots and stuff like that. Real good stuff.
Yeah, he's really getting like kind of creative with where he wants to put the camera and the close-ups that he wants. I mean, he kind of does the Martin Scorsese Coke shot close up.
Yeah.
I thought I was like, man, his skills have like developed a ton, and obviously he's probably getting a ton more money, like working with A24 and stuff like that. But as the story progresses, to the inciting incident, this movie did something that I think is really important for horror movies. And it's really hard to do. But in the first half of this movie, before everything kind of ramps up, like you actually enjoy spending time with the characters.
Right.
Without even like, you don't have to like the characters necessarily, but the things that are happening between them, you're actually kind of having fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it really does lull you into, you never forget you're about to watch what you're about to watch. Like there's enough creepy shit going on while they're setting up, the whole thing that you're never going to forget that this is a horror movie, but it does almost lull you into this kind of comfort. And then when that first kill does strike, it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like with this movie, it is kind of, I mean, I don't know if it's not quite a slow burn. It does take its time getting to where it needs to go. But when it gets to that point, it doesn't stop.
It really doesn't. And I actually appreciated that because a lot of slasher movies will like, you get 15, 20 minutes into the movie and people are dying left and right. And like, you almost become desensitized by the end of the movie. It's like, okay, God, how many people have died at this point? Like there's the kill count thing that I know you enjoy. Like the kill count in this movie is relatively low for a slasher movie.
And quick.
Yeah. And I think that really works in its favor because you don't spend an hour and 10 minutes of this movie watching people get killed. You spend like 40 minutes, 30 minutes.
Yeah. And it's funny, even leading up to us seeing it, I saw like one article that was talking about like, it's kind of a slave to its tropes, like this movie. And I think it's being very upfront with the slasher tropes that it's employing. But, honestly, I feel like they subverted a lot of expectations for how these movies play out. Like we never got, once the violence starts ramping up, we never got the scene where the people that are still alive get together and go, okay, how do we get out of this?
Right.
What's the weakness? Where, there's never this kind of like Scooby-Doo moment where they're like, we got to get out of here. It's just chaos. And kind of like some of the movies we'll talk about later with A24, the other horror movies that they've done. I think it really does like subvert a lot of those expectations, even if they're kind of using a very standard format. So I thought it was a breath of fresh air.
Totally. And that's actually a really good point, because I'm not sure a single character knows what's going on until they're in the shit, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Like there is no moment to kind of say, hey, how are we going to get out of here? Because by the time they understand that they're in trouble, they're in too much trouble to get out of here.
Yeah. And it does this really cool thing too, where while you're kind of learning about the characters and their motivations, you're kind of learning about the villains and their motivations too. And it's kind of doing this like balancing act of, you know, when everything takes off, you're going to know everyone that's involved. And it's not this mysterious thing that's happening off to the side. Like you actually kind of know quite a lot. And that plays into how the characters react to them. You know, the two people could already be dead, but one person doesn't know it. These old people have anything to do with it, or whether those people are dead or not. Right. And so I just thought the way that they played with that, and the fact that like this whole, like once the chaos starts in the time of the movie, it only feels like an hour or even less. Right. Like it just breaks out.
It's all very
and
quick.
Then ends. Yeah. So I really liked that. I thought the kind of themes that it was playing with were really well incorporated. The kind of like dichotomy of like sexual expression and sexual repression, and how kind of like those two roads lead to the same chaotic place that we all end up. And that stuff, I like that stuff, like kind of sunk into my head once they started touching on it. And I just like couldn't get out, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And so I was like always looking for the next little comment they were going to make on that. Right. And they kind of do sprinkle those little things throughout the whole movie. And I think they balance that really well. Yeah, I think that this, like all in all, this was one of the more fun experiences I've had at the theaters recently.
Yeah, it definitely, there are parts that are really fun. There are parts that are like just immensely terrifying. Yeah. And there are parts that are so gruesome that like I genuinely like lost control of my body and like was just kind of flailing in my seat. Yeah. Specifically, I think the most like difficult to watch part is when Jenna Ortega gets her hand hammered. Ooh, I just like didn't know what to do with myself. I'm just kind of flailing about.
That's a big Mike Flanagan move. Right. The hand deformation. Right. You know?
It's fucked up.
Yeah. And it's funny because, you know, the first episode that we did on this show was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And this movie is obviously sending up a lot of the you know, imagery from that movie and paying a lot of respect to that. But at the end of that, we were talking about what was the last great slasher. And I think this is like the next great slasher. Yeah, like I really think do. So too. I think they're doing a lot of new things with it. And not only, it's not like some faceless, monstrous villain who can't die. It's something like a little bit more real.
Yeah, it's scary. Pretty clever.
Yeah, it's very clever.
I was really, I knew that old people were kind of like the villainous part of this movie before seeing it, but the way that they did lay it out with like this kind of like lost beauty who really just kind of wants to get laid and her husband can't do it. It was really, I really enjoyed that a lot. Yeah.
Well, let's get into that. So what worked about this movie? I guess I just want to start with the cast.
Excellent.
I thought everyone just brought
across the board.
Yeah. Everyone like, and I mean, I don't think that this type of movie, you're not going to get what, you know, the Academy would call an award-worthy performance, but everyone's like having fun and everyone's like in on it and committed. And I think like Kid Cudi has been, also, is it disrespectful to call him Kid Cudi?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Because he is listed as Scott Muscudi, but I'm just going to call him Kid Cudi. Like he's popped up in a bunch of movies here and there. This is like definitely the first time where I'm like, oh, he's serious about this. Right. You know, he's not just doing these funny cameos in movies. Like he can bring it.
Absolutely. I think that everybody kind of plays against type with the exception of Mia Goth, who I'm not sure has a type.
I know.
I think she's just kind of
enigmatic,
strange. Yeah. But like specifically with Kid Cudi, like he has like his character, even 20 minutes into the movie, I didn't expect his character to have this sort of softness that he shows. Like he's like so willing to help the old man find his wife, or when he's, you know, kind of playing the guitar and opening up a little bit. I was pretty impressed by that.
And those were the little kind of character notes where I think they did the perfect thing where they had some exposition they wanted to get across with these characters. They didn't want to spend a bunch of time doing it or do it in this like over explanatory way. And so there's just these little touches where like, when his character's on the couch when they're talking to the old man and he's like, He's obviously like ready for any kind of racist shit this old man's going to throw at him. And he talks about having served in Vietnam and, that not being a great environment for a Black American at that time. And he's just kind of like, I'm above it now. Like, I'm just here to do me. And even though that guy's kind of probably like this old racist dude, he's like, my dude needs help. And I'll throw a little attitude his way, but I'm going to help him. And also, do you know that his character's name is in this movie?
I can't think of it.
Jackson Hole.
Jackson Hole.
It's a great porn name.
That is a really good porn name.
Yeah. Brittany Snow just kind of eating up every scene that she's in.
She
great
totally
musical
is.
Performance.
Mm-hmm.
And just a long way since Hairspray,
Right. Well, I mean, when we were leaving the theater, I mentioned that Brittany Snow was like my first real crush, I think, on screen. I was specifically obsessed with The Pacifier and John Tucker Must Die just because of Brittany Snow. I watched those movies so many times. And so this was a big deal for me, this movie.
Oh, yeah, because she's very, very generous with her body in this movie.
Great performance by her.
If we're going to talk about the nudity in this movie, I thought it was handled pretty well. Like,
I thought so too.
In a way,
I mean, you're making a porno.
Yeah.
So
nudity is deployed in a, cinematic way without being too voyeuristic or exploitative.
I don't think anybody's running through a field topless. I think the only times that they're shown, aside from maybe Pearl, I think the only time they are shown in the nude is when they are filming filming scenes. And
even those are like the in-camera film that, they're shooting at the time. I think the only time that nudity is exploited in this movie is the old man's ass. Yeah. Where they're like, okay, we're going to exploit this for a reaction. Jenna Ortega, I mean, between this and Scream, probably the next like Jamie Lee Curtis.
Right. It's her year. I haven't seen two of these movies, but she's been in 4 movies this year. Mm-hmm. Scream, X, a movie called The Fallout, and then that Studio 666 movie for the Foo Fighters. So definitely is her year, or at least her quarter of the year, because it's only been 4 months.
Yeah. What else worked for you in this movie?
Well, just continuing on the cast for just a split second longer. We mentioned Mia Goth, and I thought she was excellent. I actually think that I enjoyed her Pearl performance more than I enjoyed her Maxine performance. Yeah. It's definitely a bit more to chew on. Mm-hmm. So like, I can understand why that, like, it's probably more of a showy performance than Maxine, but she was excellent. And
very good.
And she's such an interesting looking person. Mm-hmm. She reminds me a lot of Shelley Duvall. Just like in the eyes.
Wow, yeah, that's a great comparison.
And then Martin Henderson, his portrayal of Wayne. I was listening to a podcast where Ti West was talking about the movie, and he mentioned something along the lines of like, everyone who came in and auditioned for Wayne was kind of playing him as like a pimp scumbag type character. Yeah. And Martin Henderson was the only one who kind of understood the angle of like a football coach almost. And I was like, that's a perfect description. Like, he really is just like, kind of just like, let's do it. Let's do it, everybody. We're going to make a goddamn good movie. And he's just like kind of a golden retriever in a lot of ways. And I loved that performance.
Well, and it's funny because after we walked out and I was talking to my partner, Ryan, she was like, I was having so much trouble not like thinking about Matthew McConaughey while he was playing that part. And I was like, but that's like, that's like Texas, that kind of guy. But he wasn't like a greasy kind of like slime ball. Right. Like, again, all these characters have like really unique motivations, and his is just a living. Right. Like, he just wants to make a living. And even just the shot of them at the very beginning, I'm assuming they're working in is it a studio or a strip joint? I thought it was a strip joint.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me.
So it's a strip joint, but it's in this industrial park where there's all these factories. And just that shot of the setting gives you so much story into like where all these people are in their lives. This dude manages this strip club, but it's not because he's necessarily a great, club owner. It's that he has a strip club in the middle of an industry that probably has a lot of patrons.
Yes, exactly.
And yeah, all that stuff was really done. So Martin Henderson, yeah. And it's funny. He has just like another iconic horror scene, if you remember, in The Ring.
Oh yeah.
He's the dude at the
there
end
you go.
that gets attacked out of the TV. So it was great to see him again.
It was. Other than that, I mean, just kind of the craft really worked. I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I thought like everything really worked well together between like the camera, the sound, the weird inner story stuff that they were playing with. And so all of that, like I said, they kind of walked that like tonal tightrope really well.
Yes. And it really does have to, like, keep the tension up once it's like you can build to the tension, but once you've pulled the trigger on that, you got to keep it as tight as possible. And that's why I think that the kind of quick fire violence of the second half of the movie works so well because it just doesn't stop. You're just like going and going and going. And it's very aware of what the audience knows and what the characters know and how to build tension between those two things. And yeah, just Ti West, being the kind of mumblecore DIY filmmaker that he is, seeing him still kind of play with cutting between the objective camera and then the film that they shoot and stuff, like all of that was, I thought really cool. And that's something that can be kind of overdone and cheesy, but it was just all fun.
Right.
When he did it.
I agree.
And then I guess the last thing is just the themes. Like, I think once you start digging into this, there's so much to chew on. And I mean, we should say we'll talk about this a little more later, but this has already spawned a prequel.
Right.
I think Ti West was in quarantine because they had to go to New Zealand to film this during the pandemic. But even then, he had to quarantine. And while he was quarantining, he just had the idea for the prequel, and he just wanted to keep going with that character. And so he wrote this other script. And when they finished filming, they were just like, "Hey, does everyone want to make this?"
Right.
And everyone was like, "Yeah." And so a lot of the themes that they were kind of playing with, I feel like are going to open up a lot in this prequel that he's working on. But just like the theme of the life that we're owed, that we feel like we're owed, and the way we execute our search for that life. And Maxine is really the only one who vocalizes this in the movie, but every character under the surface is kind of on that journey. Like, I was just going through the characters, like Mia, she vocalizes fame and notoriety. Later in the movie, we find out her dad's a televangelist.
Right.
And I think they try to tell us that this part of Texas is really buying into this guy's bullshit. And maybe her being his daughter can kind of see through it. And maybe that's why she makes that hard turn.
Right.
But if she's trying to be a famous porn star, she's kind of following her dad's footsteps just on this other path.
Exactly.
Lorraine, her kind of just like Christian girl self-discovery type thing. And her kind of like thinking for herself, making her own observations and being vocal about the things that she currently believes. And then we talked about Wayne, money, maybe as someone who's like just scraping by. I think he's the one that like says in the movie, he doesn't want to make a living wearing a hard hat or something like that. Yeah. But like, and RJ, who's the director, his just like this immortality through art type thing that he's carrying on about. And then Pearl and Howard, the old people, just like, what happens when you're at the end of your rope and you haven't found that life that you feel like you deserve? For Pearl, and I'm sure we'll get a lot more of this in the prequel, it's like, she's kind of the opposite of Maxine, or what we can expect Maxine to be if she doesn't get to the thing that she wants, Right. It's like, maybe she had this life. It seems like she was like a dancer or something. Like she had some kind of.
Right. I think she was a dancer. I don't know if she's a professional dancer or if she just loved to dance, but she loved to dance, and she's very upset that all these people got all this hotness, and I guess they're wasting it in her eyes. Yeah. Her scraping and scratching for that way after at the point of her prime, Right. And then Howard just essentially being like, I want things to stay the way they are, because I mean, for the backstory that we get on him is that he might've been, a pretty stand-up guy, like in the war or whatever,
lived on a farm, supported his wife. Until we see the violence break out, we could just guess that maybe he just lived a pretty standard life.
Right.
And now that it's over and he knows that there's nothing else coming, he just wants to be left alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so just the way it played with all that stuff, I thought was awesome.
Yeah. And specifically, I do want to shout out one specific scene because it plays into specifically the things you were saying about Pearl. When they started playing Landslide, I was like, this is going to be bad. Like, I'm not going to enjoy this scene.
Yeah.
And then that turned out to be probably like the standout scene for me in the movie. Is just like that is like, I think the culmination of all of that, like camera, sound, editing, all of these things coming together in a really, really fun way. I loved the split screens they were playing with. Obviously the themes of Landslide can like be perfectly just like shifted over to what Pearl's doing as she's like taking her makeup off. Like, so like, it was a very sad moment in the movie. And it makes you feel bad for these people that like, that's why you're excited for an X prequel, is because you actually cared about this character before the character even really, did anything. Yeah. And so I thought that was very impressive stuff.
It was very good. And it was a great distillation of just all that for one quiet moment before shit gets crazy. And great performance by Brittany Snow too. And I wonder if Kid Cudi was actually playing the guitar.
I have to imagine so.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
All right. Things that did not work. You want to start?
Sure. You alluded to it earlier. The televangelist thing actually didn't really connect very well with me. It kind of left me a bit confused.
Yeah.
Mostly because like everybody's watching this one broadcast, like it plays in the gas station at the beginning of the movie. It's playing in the house at the end of the movie. I was just kind of like, it seemed like there was almost supposed to be this aha moment that just didn't particularly land with me very well.
I agree. Yeah. It was like, it kind of there was a point where I was like, is this like a cult town? Like, is there some kind of culty thing going on? Cause you do see it pop up in numerous places. I mean, you see it in the crime scene, I guess, at the beginning, and then the gas station, then back at the house, during the chaos. And I guess the function of it is really to just kind of sell that little like piece of characterization at the end.
Yeah.
But that's just a small piece of characterization. It's not the kind of like whip bang, oh my God, ending or anything like that. And it is kind of funny because in a way, Pearl is kind of the main character of this. And knowing that we're going into a movie all about her, it was kind of interesting to just hit that note at the end of it where it's just like, oh yeah, and this. And I do like the characterization, but yeah, I agree. The way it was deployed was kind of like, this was supposed to be bigger, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But if like, they turned on the TV, while we're hanging out in the cabin and she was like, oh yeah, that's my dad or something like that. Or,
for real.
It probably would have had the same effect where you're like, oh, okay, I get why she's at where she's at.
And maybe there'll be breadcrumbs there when I watch the movie again that I pick up on and I'll come to like that aspect a bit more. But just on the initial watch, that didn't quite land with the effect that I think it was supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as far as the front half of the movie, I think they were kind of stretching some of the scenes a little bit for time, which, I mean, fine. They were interesting. Like I never thought that the movie was slow.
Right.
And I don't think slow burn means slow. I think there's an intention, and there felt like there was intention in how slow it was going. But I also felt like they could have left a few more breadcrumbs for, the deeper themes that were going on. But the thing is like for a slasher film like this, the bar is so low for this type of writing that I really can't hold it against it. I can't.
And I know like we're both fans of the genre. Like we both like slasher movies. So we're both like, we want to like these movies. Yeah. So when one like is pretty good, it's like, this is awesome. Yeah. This is the best.
Yeah. So. I like the shitty ones too. Yeah, so I really can't hold any of this.
I'll watch Jason X. I'll watch Freddy versus Jason. Like I'm down for all of that shit. So,
the other thing, and it's funny because as I started writing out this thought, the thought evolved in my head, but the treatment of RJ's character, the director, felt really mean. Yeah. And, but as I kind of thought about it more, it felt like kind of a comment from Ti West.
About himself?
Yeah. It is this kind of like, because the whole time he's filming a porno, his girlfriend, who's very modest, is running sound for him. And she's like, why are we filming this? This is smut. And he's like, hey, anything can be art and we got to start somewhere. And it's about cinema and independent filmmaking and the power of collaboration. And he's waxing on about all this stuff. And then the moment that he's challenged emotionally, like all that goes out the window.
Right.
And he's like, you know, it's like anything for the film. Even this? No, not that. And I think that's kind of West being like, no matter how auteur a director or filmmaker or any kind of artist may seem, at the end of the day, we're all insecure,
Right.
you know, about one thing or another. But going from that scene where, you know, his girlfriend essentially takes part in the porno and he has to film it and just suffer through it, and then deciding to leave and then just getting murdered, I was like, oh, that's a rough end.
It is pretty rough
for that dude.
It is.
And I think it honestly, like the scene leading up to him getting killed does add to the brutality of it, where you're just like, oh man, dude, this guy just didn't get a break. But I, you know, thinking about it a little bit more, I do think it was Ti West having a little bit of fun with I mean, this isn't the first movie that he's, you know, waxed poetically about filmmaking.
Oh yeah, You're Next. Yeah.
Which is what we said the last great slasher, well, I thought the last great slasher film was, actually has Ti West in it.
Yeah.
And that great conversation between him and Joe Swanberg where he's like, yeah, I'm like involved in this like kind of underground
documentary.
Yeah. Collective. And he's like, underground, like you guys are in like a basement. And he's like him just like poking him and shitting on him.
And then he just immediately dies after that.
Yeah, he just immediately dies. Seems to be a theme here. But you know, again, the bar is so low for this type of movie that everything, we could just nitpick this. I honestly couldn't think of nitpicks.
No,
like, I was
couldn't
like, here's
either.
this or that, but no. All in all, a great film. I haven't rated it on Letterboxd yet, but I think I got to give it 4 stars just for the heights.
Right. I gave it 4 stars as someone who hands out 4 stars like candy on Halloween. I don't know if that means anything, but I really liked the movie, I guess.
Yeah. I liked it too. So please go see it. All right. So I want to talk about, before we go, I want to talk about A24.
Right.
One of the hottest film companies in the game right now. They started in 2013 as a kind of curator and distributor of like really unique independent films. As time has gone on, A24 has started to have more of a hand in producing the films that they release. And I looked at their track record and their filmography and how they were involved in all these movies that they've been doing since 2013. If you look closely at the films A24 has actually produced and not just released, you start to see a really interesting involvement with horror.
Yeah.
And out of the 19 films that they've had production involvement in, 7 of them have been horror movies, which I think is like kind of a big chunk for one genre.
For sure.
And over the next 2 years, they're producing and releasing 4 more horror movies. And so it just kind of makes me think, I'm like, they obviously have their lane, but are they kind of dipping into the Blumhouse pool a little bit? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good point.
Because blood as a business expense, fake blood as a business expense is actually a pretty good value.
It is.
For the shock that you get on screen versus how cheap it is. You know? It's actually probably a pretty good deal. So anyway, they have a great lineup of horror releases. So I wanted to talk about our 3 favorite A24 horror films. So I'll start with, my number 3 is Hereditary. Ari Aster's, I think is his first like mainstream feature.
Yeah.
Probably has a feature somewhere, you know, from college or something, but a lot of short films too. But to me, this movie executes on what is more like the traditional horror format. Kind of teeters between this like ghost possession and like family tragedy.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And it's horrifying without trying to pelt you constantly with jump scares. And while I think Midsommar is a superior film, I think it's something that is hard to clearly put into a box.
Yeah.
And Hereditary seems to neatly fit in that box a little
Definitely
bit more.
fits in that box way better. It follows kind of the same formulas. I don't have Hereditary on my list, but that is mostly a function of wanting to have a more interesting list than having 2 Ari Aster films on my list.
Okay,
So.
And that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
And those 2 movies are both productions that they had hands in, and Man, yeah, Ari Aster is just like killing it right now. And his next movie is one of he describes as like a horror black comedy.
Right. I mean, I think you could describe Midsommar that way too. I think that movie's hilarious.
Yeah.
My number 3 is The Witch.
Yes.
Robert Eggers.
This is my number 2.
An absolutely excellent, like there's a slow burn. You know what I mean? Like that's like a slow, creepy, just dreadful movie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I've ever been, there may be a handful of movies that impress me with the written dialogue as much as The Witch does. I think that is
immersive.
Right. It's one of the most like beautifully written movies in terms of like the prose that I've ever watched. And yeah, it introduced the world to Anya Taylor-Joy, which everybody loves. And it's got, what's his name with the deep voice that...
Oh, man, I always forget his name. And it's a shame because he's so good in everything that he's in.
Yeah, he's very good.
He played the Green Knight in The Green Knight.
So yeah, I mean, that's an excellent movie. I think that was one of their first like big horror bangers. Yeah. You know what I mean?
That really like took off.
Right.
And I think we talked about... X and how once the tension breaks out, that it's this high wire act where you have to keep the rope tight. And if it loosens at all, the story could fall.
Right.
And, or our buying into it goes away. And with X, that comes at about the 40-minute mark. With The Witch, it's opening scene.
Yep.
And then it has to sustain that throughout the whole thing in a movie where very little happens, but is just like, I mean, it's literally the definition of a vibe where someone's like, that movie's a vibe.
Totally.
Like, The Witch is a vibe.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the last time I watched it was last Halloween, and just watching it again, I was like, damn, this movie is so good.
Yeah. It's really great.
Okay. So that was my number 2, your number 3. Why don't you go to your number 2?
My number 2 is Green Room.
And this is my number 1.
There you go. So Green Room, I mean, what is there to say? It's fucking horrific. Like one of the most like claustrophobic and tough to watch. You want to talk about squirming in your seat? Oh yeah. We saw this at Sundance, and the lady next to me was about to like have an aneurysm. Yeah. She was so freaked out.
Just like that was the point where a horror movie did reach the heights of like an Avengers Endgame in terms of audience reaction.
Right.
Although the cool thing was it wasn't baked into the experience or baked into what you thought about the movie. In fact, seeing it at Sundance, we knew very little about what this movie was going to be. And it was just people screaming and like losing their minds and just going, oh no.
Yeah.
And another great work of tension. It's fast and mean and brutal. It forces you to empathize with almost all the characters in one way or another. And a lot of the times you empathize through their panic and them making bad decisions.
Yep.
And
it's the ultimate decision movie too.
Oh yeah.
You know,
it's just the ultimate, like, what would you do if you were in this situation? And you're like, well, I'd probably be screwed.
Right. And the performances are just excellent.
So good.
You know,
yeah.
God rest his soul. Anton Yelchin is just incredible in this. Obviously, you know, Patrick Stewart is terrifying in this. And so,
and in a similar way to X, the way that like it has this very normal villain where the villain, the real violence here is like the clashes in humanity. And that line at the end of Green Room where Anton Yelchin's pointing the gun at Patrick Stewart and he's like, you were so scary. Like you were so scary in the dark or something like that. And you're like, that's it. It's like, it's just a dude.
It's just a dude.
It's so horrifying. Yeah. Green Room's incredible. All right. So that covers my list. What's your number 1?
My number 1 is Midsommar.
Okay.
I love that movie so much. It's kind of like how you mentioned, it's hard to put in a box. It is in so many ways like antithetical to every other horror movie. It takes place in bright daylight. It is just kind of like very funny. You know what I mean? It's very creepy. Doesn't have a lot of straightforward horror elements. You know, there's not ghosts. There's not a ton of like haunted stuff. It's just kind of like a really bad relationship. Yeah. And a girl with really bad depression and anxiety and a pretty fucked up like cult of people.
Yeah. And that, like when this movie came out, my hot take was that it's a better breakup movie than Marriage Story.
Okay.
And they came out in the same year. So that was always my take. And every time I watch it, I do just see Ari Aster taking what is the kind of conventional dead teenagers slasher thing.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like Hostel or something like that, where it's like travel to a foreign land. The locals are scary, and we're going to pick off everyone one by one. That is not how it plays out, but it definitely sets you up for
right.
that. And it's funny when you watch this movie, how out of place the opening scene kind of feels, especially in tone to the rest of the movie. But then you kind of get through the movie and figure out like really what they're trying to say with it. And you're like, that's it. That's that whole thing is like, trauma and dread. And then how do we get support in that? And, it's so, and I kind of had a feeling that you would get this on there.
Yeah.
And so, but I always like die on this like hill that like Midsommar is not necessarily a horror movie. It's like, a breakup movie that takes all the horrific aspects of breaking up with someone or breaking off of a relationship or having no one to turn to and elevating them to literal like blood and terror.
Totally.
And, it's seriously like, I don't think there's been anything like Midsommar in like the last 10 years. It's like wholly unique.
Yeah.
That's a 5-star movie.
It really, not to go on too long about Midsommar, but like
I could go all day.
It does a similar thing where you really are, I don't know if you're empathizing, but like you hate everyone in this movie. For sure. You hate everyone. Like you hate all of the Americans that come in and like, they're just like so insensitive to everything that this group, I guess, is doing and all they care about is like their thesis. Oh, I've got to get, this is for my thesis. And so it is, and Florence Pugh just like, all-time performance.
Incredible and
iconic stuff. Like so many images from this movie are like
memes,
iconic. So and that's the thing. And this is the thing that I always focus on when it comes to horror movies is like we kind of have to care about who we're watching die on screen for it to have a strong effect. And with Midsommar, these dudes that are traveling around, you do hate them. They're just like selfish and they're like, oh, we want to be part of this community, but they don't give a shit about the community. They're just trying to exploit it for grades, essentially. And nerds.
And, you would take like Will Poulter's character in that and be like,
Vape God.
Yeah, Vape God. And you'd be like, oh, he's such a douchebag. Like when he gets it, it'll be kind of fun to watch, but they don't really give you that.
No.
And then the way that they reveal what happened to him is so much worse and like horrifying to the point where it's like, it doesn't matter if you like this person or not. We'll get you to have an opinion on them. And then we'll off them in this way. That's like really eerie and awful. Incredible movie. All right. We did it. If you saw X, tell us what you thought about the movie in the comments. If you didn't watch X and aren't going to, tell us why.
Yeah.
Also, if you have a favorite A24 horror movie, tell us about it and tag your Letterboxd reviews with Oddly Utah. And see you on down the road.
We'll see you then.